Today we're diving deep into Micron Technology.
Sounds good.
So, Micron, it's a big name in the world of semiconductors, and we're going to break down their recent performance, what's driving their success,
Yeah,
and what challenges they're facing, all really important stuff for anyone thinking about Micron stock.
absolutely. It's a dynamic industry, and investors need to really grasp the forces at play here to make informed decisions.
All right, let's kick things off with Micron's latest financials, specifically their fiscal Q2 2025 results.
Right.
Because the numbers they released, they really kind of jumped out at us.
Definitely did. Micron posted revenue of $8.05 billion for the quarter, a significant increase from the $5.82 billion they reported a year earlier. And importantly for investors, this exceeded market forecasts. It really points to a strong demand for their products. And the big engine behind this growth, it's that rising demand for high bandwidth memory, or HBM.
Yeah, HBM, we keep hearing about it. And it seems they brought in over $1 billion just from HBM in that quarter alone.
That's right. Passing that billion-dollar mark in HBM revenue really shows Micron's growing role in the AI infrastructure. The huge demands of AI are driving this almost insatiable need for high-performance memory solutions, and HBM is right at the forefront. And this demand also drove record levels for their overall data center DRAM business.
Right, and it wasn't all just HBM. Their broader DRAM and NAND segments also saw really strong demand, especially in data centers and AI applications. Their compute and networking business unit revenue, it surged a massive 109% year over year.
Exactly. And that huge jump in the compute and networking unit is largely tied to that over 50% sequential increase in HBM revenues we talked about. Now, zooming out to the bigger picture, DRAM revenues, which make up the bulk of their business, at 76% of their total revenue, saw a healthy 47.3% year-over-year increase, reaching $6.1 billion. Even NAND revenues, which we'll get into a bit later, showed some positive momentum at $1.86 billion, up 18.4% from the previous year.
So strong revenue growth across the board.
Yeah.
How's that translate to profits for Micron? Well, the profitability metrics were also positive. Micron reported a GAAP net income of $1.58 billion and non-GAAP net income of $1.78 billion for the quarter. Their earnings per share GAAP diluted EPS at a $1.41 and non-GAAP diluted EPS at a $1.56. Also beat their earlier projections. This shows they're effectively turning strong revenue into solid bottom-line results. And just as a quick reminder for those who may not know, GAAP refers to generally accepted accounting principles, which is a standard set of rules for financial reporting, while non-GAAP figures adjust for certain items to provide another perspective on performance.
Got it. And what about their overall financial health?
Right.
Particularly those profit margins and how well they're generating cash.
Their gross margins look pretty good, coming in at 36.8% on a GAAP basis and 37.9% on a non-GAAP basis. They also generated a solid $3.94 billion in operating cash flow during the quarter, which shows how efficient their operations are. And they ended the quarter with a robust cash and investments balance of $9.6 billion. That gives them a lot of flexibility for future investments and strategic moves.
So it sounds like they're operating from a pretty solid financial foundation.
Right.
Now let's dig a little deeper into this leadership in high bandwidth memory. You mentioned its importance for AI.
Yeah.
What's giving Micron that competitive edge in this key area?
Well, Micron's made a strategic bet on the explosive growth of AI, and they're positioning themselves to capitalize on it through a big focus on HBM technology. And, their collaborations, especially with NVIDIA, really highlight this. This ensures their memory solutions are compatible with those leading AI and gaming graphics processors. Micron's very confident in the superiority of their HBM3E products. They really emphasize the enhanced performance and the greater power efficiency compared to what their rivals are offering.
And it's not just about current products either. From what I understand, they've got some pretty ambitious plans to ramp up their HBM production capacity.
Exactly. They see the long-term demand in this sector, and they're proactively expanding their high bandwidth capacity within their existing manufacturing facilities. And these plans extend through 2026 and beyond. It's that forward-thinking approach that's crucial in this rapidly evolving tech landscape.
So where do they stand in the HBM market right now in terms of market share, and what are their goals for the near future?
Currently, Micron holds about 10% of the HBM market, but they've set a pretty ambitious goal to grow that to somewhere between 20 and 25% by 2025 or 2026. This aligns with their overall share of the broader DRAM market, so they're aiming to be a dominant player in the HBM space. And projections suggest that HBM will become a much larger part of their total DRAM output. increasing from about 1.5% in 2023 to around 6% by 2025.
That's a significant increase they're planning for. So, shifting gears to the current quarter fiscal Q3 2025,
Yeah.
what are their expectations?
Well, Micron's expecting to keep this momentum going, projecting record revenues in the range of $8.8 billion plus or minus $200 million. This optimistic outlook is largely driven by that continued strong demand for both HBM and data center DRAM, all fueled by the ongoing AI expansion. They expect continued growth in shipments across both DRAM and NAND memory segments to contribute to that anticipated record performance.
And how does that line up with what market analysts were predicting?
Well, their revenue guidance of $8.8 billion actually surpasses the Zacks consensus estimate, which was sitting around $8.47 billion.
Yeah.
So this suggests that Micron's seeing even stronger demand than analysts initially thought.
Interesting. There was a little bit of talk about their margin forecast causing a slight dip in their stock price.
Right.
What were the factors there?
Yeah, while the revenue picture looks great, Micron's non-GAAP gross margin forecast for Q3 sits at about 36.5%, give or take 100 basis points. And just so everyone's on the same page, a basis point is 1/100 of a percentage point. So some analysts might have been hoping for a slightly higher margin. And this relatively stable margin, despite that projected strong revenue growth, likely reflects the ongoing investments they're making in ramping up HBM production and potentially some continued pressures in the NAND market.
Right.
But their adjusted earnings per share guidance of $1.57 plus or minus 10 cents remains above the previous consensus estimate.
Okay.
So it seems overall profitability should stay strong. That market reaction appears to be pretty nuanced, acknowledging the strong AI-driven growth, but also paying close attention to those margin details.
It does seem like that emphasis on HBM production, while driving a lot of growth, might be creating some interesting ripples, especially in the availability of non-HBM DRAM.
You're right. That high demand for HBM and the fact that it's a more complex manufacturing process, it needs more silicon than standard DRAM chips, it's definitely contributing to a tighter supply of that non-HBM DRAM in the market. The industry's cutting-edge manufacturing capacity is increasingly being allocated to HBM production to meet the growing needs of the AI sector.
So what does that mean for the wider DRAM market and for Micron's strategy?
Well, this constrained supply could have a few consequences. Firstly, it could push up the prices of non-HBM DRAM simply because of supply and demand.
Makes sense.
This might actually benefit Micron's revenue in that segment, but it also raises considerations about competitive pricing. Secondly, prioritizing HBM production might affect the production volumes and delivery times for their other DRAM products. Micron needs to strike a balance. They need to capitalize on the high-growth HBM opportunity while making sure they're meeting the demands of their broader customer base for other types of DRAM. It's a real balancing act in how they allocate their resources.
So let's turn to the NAND flash memory market now, which seems to be hitting a bit of a rough patch.
Right.
What's Micron doing to tackle that reported decline in revenue there?
They're taking a multi-pronged approach. A major focus is on increasing overall shipments for both DRAM and NAND in Q3 to hit that projected record revenue. They're also banking on the fact that supply adjustments from other NAND flash memory manufacturers will help improve the overall market conditions. And importantly, Micron's been proactively moderating how much they're using their NAND fabrication facilities, and they've reduced wafer output to better align the NAND supply with the current demand.
So they're actively managing the supply.
Right.
But what about efforts to boost demand in that NAND market?
On the demand side, Micron's putting a lot of weight behind the data center NAND market. They've hit record market share in solid-state drives, or SSDs, for data centers, and they expect to bring in multiple billions in revenue from this segment with further market share gains throughout 2025. They're also busy developing and qualifying high-performance NAND products specifically for data centers, like their 9550 SSD. And after some inventory adjustments by their data center clients, they're predicting a return to growth in NAND bit shipments in that vital area. This strategic focus suggests they might be shifting their NAND product strategy towards that more stable data center segment.
Interesting. All right, let's look at profitability now. How does Micron's gross profit margin stack up against some of its competitors in the memory and semiconductor industries?
In Q2 2025, Micron's GAAP gross margin was at 36.8%, with a non-GAAP margin a tad higher at 37.9%. Looking at some of their competitors, Samsung's gross margin has been in a similar ballpark lately. However, SK Hynix has been posting a higher gross margin, likely because of their strong position in that very profitable HBM market. Intel's gross margin has fluctuated more, reflecting the diversity of their business operations. And companies that mainly focus on high-performance processors like NVIDIA and AMD, they usually enjoy higher gross margins.
So Micron's profitability seems competitive in the memory world,
Yeah.
but not necessarily at the top across the whole semiconductor landscape. What's really influencing Micron's current margin levels?
There's a few things at play. Scaling up HBM production comes with those initial higher costs,
Hmm.
and their decision to underutilize their NAND flash memory fabrication facilities, that's also putting some downward pressure on their overall margins. And the proportion of sales from consumer-oriented products also affects the average margin, as these products tend to have lower margins compared to those sold to data centers.
Hmm.
That expected slight dip in Micron's gross margin for Q3 is likely a continuation of these trends. Maintaining a strong and competitive gross margin in this ever-changing market, that's a key focus for Micron.
Now let's circle back to that driving force shaping the industry,
Yeah.
artificial intelligence.
Right.
How big is that AI demand for Micron's products, and what technological leaps are they taking to really grab hold of that demand?
That growing demand for AI is turning out to be a massive growth driver for Micron, especially for their data center DRAM revenue. It tripled year over year in Q2 2025, which is just remarkable.
Wow.
The huge processing power needed to train and run those advanced AI models needs tons of high bandwidth, high capacity memory. Micron's HBM revenue growth, which was over 50% sequentially and broke past that billion-dollar mark, is a direct result of this strong demand. Plus, Micron's a leader in the market for low-power DRAM, or LPDRAM, which is increasingly important for energy efficiency and AI server infrastructure.
And their 1-gamma DRAM node, that seems like a pretty big technological step forward.
It is.
Can you talk about the potential impact of that innovation?
Absolutely. The 1-gamma DRAM node is Micron's most advanced 6th-generation DRAM tech, and it uses cutting-edge EUV lithography in its manufacturing. This advanced technique brings some big improvements. Compared to the previous generation, it offers about 20% lower power consumption, a 15% boost in performance, with data transfer speeds potentially reaching 9,200 megatransfers per second, and over 30% greater bit density. So, for investors, this means Micron is at the forefront of memory innovation. For AI and lots of other computing applications, they're offering more powerful and more efficient memory solutions. And the fact that big CPU makers like AMD and Intel are already giving this tech the thumbs up, that just underscores how significant it is for the future of computing.
It really does sound like high bandwidth memory. It's not just a passing trend. It's like a fundamental growth engine for the foreseeable future.
I'd agree.
So what's the overall market outlook for HBM, and how is Micron planning to grab a bigger slice of that pie?
The total addressable market, or TAM, for HBM in 2025 is projected to be over $35 billion by Micron themselves, driven by those continuous AI advancements and the growing complexity of AI models. These advanced models need significantly more memory bandwidth compared to traditional computing. AI accelerators like GPUs and TPUs, they're now being equipped with much more memory capacity, which is directly driving up this demand for HBM. And in particular, HBM3E, that's become the go-to memory standard for high-end AI model training. Even industry analysts are predicting the HBM market could double in size just this year.
And what are the specific strategies Micron's using to make the most of this big market opportunity?
Well, they've got a few key initiatives in motion. They're aggressively expanding their HBM production capacity at their existing manufacturing facilities. And these expansion efforts are going to continue through 2026. They're also setting up a new advanced packaging facility in Singapore, which should be up and running in 2027, further boosting their long-term HBM production capacity. Right now, they're ramping up production of their HBM3E in both 8-high and 12-high configurations, with the 12-high expected to make up most of their HBM shipments by late 2025. But they're not stopping. They're actively developing the next generation HBM4, which is promising a bandwidth improvement of over 60% compared to HBM3E, with mass production slated for 2026. Importantly, they're securing those long-term HBM supply agreements with major clients extending into 2026, which shows strong customer demand and commitment. Their goal is to match their HBM market share with their overall share of the DRAM market by Q4 2025. That's a clear sign of their ambition in this crucial and rapidly expanding sector.
Finally, let's talk about the bigger picture of risks and opportunities Micron's facing in the DRAM and NAND markets. The semiconductor industry is notoriously cyclical and competitive.
Absolutely. The DRAM and NAND markets are inherently cyclical, and that's a constant risk. There's always the chance of oversupply and the price pressures that come with it. The current NAND market is a perfect example. There's oversupply, and demand is a bit weaker. Growing competition, especially from Chinese memory manufacturers, is another significant challenge for established players. Geopolitical tensions and trade restrictions can throw a wrench in those complex global supply chains. And then there's the fact that companies like Micron depend on a small number of very large customers, which creates a certain degree of concentration risk.
But even with all those challenges, Micron still has some big opportunities ahead, right?
Definitely. The rapid adoption of AI across the board is the biggest opportunity right now. It's driving the huge demand for high-performance DRAM, particularly HBM. There's also potential for the PC market to rebound. The end of life for Windows 10 is coming up, and AI-enabled PCs are emerging, and that could really boost memory demand. And let's not forget the increasing use of memory in vehicles and the continued rollout of 5G networks and the explosion of IoT devices. All these markets are expanding, and they need memory solutions.
Yeah.
And Micron's shift towards those higher margin products like DDR5, LPDDR5, and HBM3E puts them in a good position to capitalize on these key growth areas.
This has been such an informative and comprehensive look at Micron Technology.
Yeah.
They seem incredibly well positioned to benefit from the exploding demand for high-performance memory, particularly HBM, thanks to their advances in that area. But as we've discussed, they're still facing some headwinds, especially in the NAND market, and that inherent cyclicality of the semiconductor industry is something investors need to keep in mind.
Absolutely. For anyone thinking about investing in Micron, the key takeaways are their strong recent financial performance, their established and growing leadership in the crucial HBM market, and the proactive steps they're taking to expand their capacity and build up their technological capabilities. But it's crucial to weigh these factors against those inherent risks in the memory market and the ever-changing competitive landscape.
One final thought for our listeners. As you think about your investments, really consider that long-term growth potential of the semiconductor industry, which is undoubtedly being driven by AI and all the tech advances around it. And take a close look at how companies like Micron are setting themselves up to capture a piece of that growth. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into Micron technology.
It's been a pleasure.
And to all our listeners, don't forget to subscribe to Stock Explorers. Hit that like button if you found this deep dive useful, and turn on notifications so you don't miss out on any future deep dives into the world of stock exploration.
Thanks, everyone.
We'll see you next time.